The rain fell hard that night, not in gentle drops, but in heavy, relentless sheets that beat against the windows like a warning. The old neon sign outside the diner buzzed and flickered, casting sickly pink light over cracked vinyl booths and empty coffee cups. Inside, the smell of burnt coffee and grease lingered in the air, the kind of scent that clings to your clothes and follows you home. Grace Miller stood behind the counter, wiping down the same spot for the third time. Her hands moved automatically, the way people move when their minds are far away. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly. The coffee machine groaned. Outside, thunder rolled through the distance like something alive. Grace was 26. But the world had already carved more years into her than she'd lived. She wore her uniform pale blue shirt, faded apron, hair tied back neat, quiet, invisible, and just beneath her makeup, a faint bruise bloomed at her temple. She kept her hair down tonight to hide it. Every storm feels the same, she thought, her inner voice low, resigned, loud, cold, and impossible to escape. She glanced toward the rain outside. If she could save just $400, she could leave this town, leave him. She didn't even have a destination. Just the idea of distance was enough. $400. Freedom priced like a used car. The bell over the door hadn't rung in an hour. It was almost closing time. And the diner was empty, except for Grace and the old radio humming softly in the background. She almost didn't notice when it happened, the sound of the door creaking open, the gust of cold air that swept through, and the smell of rain, and something darker that followed. When she looked up, she saw him. A man stepped through the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, soaked from the storm. His black jacket clung to him, rain dripping onto the tiled floor. There was an energy about him, quiet but sharp, like he carried the storm inside his chest. His hair was dark, slicked back by the rain, his jaw rough with stubble. But it wasn't his looks that made Grace's heart tighten. It was his eyes. They were dark brown, unreadable. Steady. Too intense for a stranger. He sat at the counter, without a word. Grace tried to smile, the kind of polite smile you give customers when you don't want them to ask questions. "Coffee," she said softly. The man looked up, his gaze locking on hers. "Black." He said. Then, after a pause, "And your name?" Something inside her stumbled. Her instinct screamed danger. But another part of her, a quieter, reckless part, stayed frozen. Caught in that stare, she poured his coffee with hands that trembled slightly. Watching the dark liquid swirl into the cup, the fluorescent light above flickered once, then steadied. When she placed the mug in front of him, he didn't look at the coffee. He looked at her hand, at the faint bruise that circled her wrist like a shadow. Her stomach knotted. She pulled her sleeve down quickly. He didn't say anything, but she could feel the question behind his silence. The storm outside grew louder, wind battering the walls like waves. He took a sip of his coffee, his movements calm, deliberate. Grace tried to busy herself refilling napkin dispensers, stacking menus, pretending not to feel his eyes on her. And yet, every time she looked up, he was already watching. The diner was small, but in that moment, it felt like the entire world had narrowed to the space between them. The hum of rain, the faint clink of his cup, her own heartbeat echoing in her chest. For a while, neither spoke. Then he said quietly, "Bad night to be out in a storm." His voice was low, rough around the edges, like gravel, softened by warmth. Grace forced a small laugh. "We don't get many travelers during weather like this." He tilted his head, studying her, especially not on bikes. She blinked. "How'd you know I ride?" He smirked slightly, the corner of his mouth curving. That jacket, she said, nodding toward the scuffed leather. It's not for fashion. The ghost of a real smile flickered across his face, the kind of smile that could melt something in your chest if you weren't careful. Observant, he murmured. For a few seconds, the world softened. Then lightning flashed outside, and in that split second, Grace saw it, the glint of something metallic beneath his jacket. Her breath caught. A gun. She turned away quickly, pretending to rearrange silverware. Pretending she hadn't seen it. Her pulse raced. Maybe he was a cop. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was something worse. He must have noticed her fear, because his voice came gentler this time. You okay? Fine. She lied. Too fast. Just jumpy from the storm. He nodded slowly but didn't believe her. And somehow, that scared her more, because he didn't seem like a man who believed lies. A long silence stretched between them. The radio cut out with a soft pop, followed by darkness. The power was gone. The diner was swallowed by shadows. The only sound, the rain drumming against the glass, and the distant rumble of thunder. Grace fumbled behind the counter for the flashlight Jerry, her boss, always kept there. Before she could find it, a hand brushed her arm. She gasped. Easy. The man said softly. It's just me. His voice was close now, right beside her ear. Warm. Grounded. Herr Pulsehammer. She found the flashlight and clicked it on. The narrow beam cutting through the dark landing on his face. Up close. He was even more striking. Drops of rain still clung to his lashes. His jaw was sharp. His eyes soft in the glow. He didn't flinch from the light. Instead, he asked, "Who hurt you?" Grace froze. The question wasn't an accusation. It was simple. Direct. Du honest. She forced a shaky smile. No one. He watched her for a long moment, the silence stretching until it became almost unbearable. Then, without another word, he pulled something from his jacket, a folded bill. He set it on the counter. $100, he said. For the coffee. Her eyes widened. It's and you can. I interrupted quietly. And you will. There was no arrogance in his voice. Only certainty. The kind that came from someone who was used to being obeyed. She didn't argue again. He took another sip of coffee. Then stood. For a moment. He lingered, the kind of pause that carries a weight words can't hold. Lightning flashed again. His profile was all sharp edges and shadows. He looked at her. Really looked like he could see the truth. She tried to bury under her uniform and fake smile. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost tender. Some storms don't end until you walk through them. Grace didn't know what that meant. But something in her chest tightened as he turned and walked out into the rain. The bell above the door jingled softly, a sound almost fragile against the thunder outside. She watched him disappear through the downpour, the dark silhouette of a man she didn't know, vanishing into a night that suddenly felt emptier without him. The diner was silent again. The only light came from her flashlight. Resting on the counter beside the untouched $100 bill, she stared at it. Then at the door. Then back at her reflection in the window, pale, tired, afraid. But beneath all that fear was something else. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. She didn't know why. Or how. Or even what she was hoping for. All she knew was that for the first time in months, the silence didn't feel suffocating. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing the streets clean, blurring the lines between what had been and what might come next. Grace turned off the flashlight. The diner fell into darkness once more. And somewhere out there in the storm, a man with eyes like night was walking away, leaving behind a woman whose life had just begun to shift. Though she didn't yet know it, Maybe he was a stranger. Maybe he was danger. But maybe, just maybe, he was also her storm, the kind that destroys everything, only to build something new in its place. That night, the storm finally began to quiet outside, the thunder rolling farther away, the rain softening to a whisper. Grace should have felt safer, but she didn't. The silence pressed against her like a weight, heavy and watchful. She'd locked her apartment door 3 times before going to bed. But old locks in old buildings only pretend to protect you. Still, she told herself it was enough. It had to be. Her tiny one-bedroom smelled faintly of cleaning products and stale air. The same cracked wallpaper. The same peeling paint. Everything familiar. Everything suffocating. She lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind slide past her windows. Then, a sound. A sharp rattle at the door. Once. Twice. Her body went rigid. The sound came again, the metallic scrape of a key being forced into the lock. Her heart froze. There was only one person besides her who had a key. Dean. She whispered to herself. Panic blooming cold and fast in her chest. The door jolted violently. The chain strained. The lock screamed. Grace's voice, slurred with whiskey and fury. I know you're in there. Open the damn door. She stumbled out of bed, heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She looked around frantically. No phone. No weapon. Nowhere to hide. Go away, she shouted. Her voice breaking. It's over. Dean, just go home. But Dean never went home. He broke the chain instead. The door crashed open, splintering the frame. He staggered, in eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched tight. Anger, radiating off him like heat. Who is he spat. Advancing on her. Who's the guy from the diner? Grace backed away, shaking her head. There's no one. Dean. Please. He lunged. His hand shot out, gripping her arm so hard she cried out. The smell of liquor and sweat filled her nose. Don't lie to me, he snarled. You think I didn't see him looking at you? You think I'm stupid? Dean. You're hurting me, she gasped, trying to pull free. But his grip only tightened, and then, the sound of another door. A new voice, low and deadly calm. Let her go. Dean froze. Grace turned, breathless, her eyes widening in disbelief. Adrian stood in the doorway, his dark clothes soaked again from the rain, his face expressionless, except for the fury burning behind his eyes. A gun glinted in his hand. Touch her again, Adrian said quietly, and I'll end you where you stand. Dean stumbled back, shocked, still gripping Grace's arm. Who the hell are you? Adrian took a slow step forward. The kind of step that makes the air heavy. The man who doesn't give second chances. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Dean dropped her arm like it burned. His gaze darted between them. Wild. Fearful. Calculating. You're both insane, he muttered, backing toward the door. You'll regret this. Adrian didn't blink. Get out. Dean fled. The door slammed. The echo rang through the small apartment like a gunshot. Grace stood frozen in the middle of the room, trembling. Her knees gave out, and she sank to the floor. Covering her face with her hands, Adrian crossed the distance in 2 strides. He knelt beside her, his voice soft now. Are you hurt? She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. No. I don't understand. How did you... He hesitated, his expression unreadable. You left the diner light on, he said simply. I saw your car. Something didn't feel right. He gently lifted her arm, his fingers brushing over the fresh bruises already forming. His jaw clenched. You're safe now, he murmured. He won't touch you again. But Grace wasn't sure what scared her more. Dean's rage. Or the quiet, dangerous certainty in Adrian's voice. The night blurred after that, sirens in the distance. Adrian helping her pack a few things. His SUV waiting downstairs, black and gleaming under the streetlight. She didn't argue. She didn't think. She just followed him. The rain had stopped completely. The city had faded away behind them, replaced by endless stretches of dark highway and the quiet hum of tires on wet asphalt. Grace sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Where are we going? She finally asked. Somewhere safe, he said. He didn't explain. And somehow, she didn't need him to. Morning came slowly, spilling pale light over the mountains. When Grace woke, the car was gone, and she was lying in a bed that didn't belong to her, in a room far too beautiful to be real. Tall windows overlooked mist-covered hills. The air smelled of coffee and pine. Somewhere downstairs, she heard the faint sound of music, soft, classical, old. She got up, still wearing yesterday's clothes, her heart pounding with confusion. When she stepped into the kitchen, she froze. Adrian stood by the stove, sleeves rolled up, cooking breakfast. Steam curled from a pan. A French press sat beside two plates. Morning, he said, without looking up. His voice was calmer now, almost human. You were exhausted. I figured food might help. Grace hovered by the doorway, uncertain. Where are we? One of my houses, he said simply. You can breathe here. No one knows you're here. You don't owe me anything. Her throat tightened. Why are you helping me? He finally turned to face her. Because I can. The simplicity of the answer disarmed her. They ate quietly. The omelette was perfect, fluffy, warm. The kind of food that tastes like care. Grace couldn't remember the last time anyone had cooked for her. For a while, the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was something else, steady, safe. When she looked at him now, she didn't just see danger. She saw control, precision, someone who understood how to command chaos, maybe because he carried so much of it himself. She found herself speaking before she could stop. I used to dream about leaving. Not this town. Exactly. Just everything. Starting over somewhere. No one knew me. He listened quietly, sipping his coffee. And why didn't you? Money. Fear. She smiled sadly. Take your pick. He nodded. Gaz est distant. I wasn't supposed to stop at that diner, he said. I was passing through. But I did. She tilted her head. Why? He looked at her, then really looked. Because sometimes life gives you one last chance to do something right. And if you ignore it, it disappears forever. Something inside her softened. Who are you? Adrian, she whispered. He hesitated. The morning light caught his profile. Sharp and unreadable. Someone who used to believe he couldn't be saved. He said finally. She didn't understand what that meant. Not yet. But she would. That afternoon, while he was outside on the phone, Grace wandered through the house. It wasn't just a house, it was a fortress. Tall walls, guarded gates, luxury wrapped in silence. She paused by a door left slightly open and heard him speaking in Italian. His tone was different, colder, sharper, commanding. The words were low, clipped. Orders. She didn't need to understand the language to recognize authority or danger. When he ended the call, he stayed quiet for a moment, as if the silence itself belonged to him. She stepped back into the hallway before he could see her. Her pulse racing. Her mind pieced it together. The gun. The control. The way people seemed to move when he spoke. Adrian Costa wasn't just some mysterious stranger. He was power. He was the kind of man people whispered about. And now she was alone in his house. When he came back inside, she was waiting, standing by the window. Arms crossed. "I heard you on the phone," she said. Her voice was calm, but her heart wasn't. "You speak Italian?" He paused. "Among other things." She met his gaze head-on. "You're not just some guy who stopped for coffee, are you?" He didn't answer immediately. He stepped closer. Slow and deliberate. "I'm the head of the Costa family," he said finally. "Based in New York." Her stomach dropped. "The Mafia." She breathed. "You're—" He stopped her with a look. "We prefer the term family business." She took a step back, every instinct screaming at her to run. "So I traded one kind of danger for another." His expression softened just a fraction. "No," he said quietly. "You traded fear for choice." The words hung between them. Heavy and confusing. "Choice," she repeated, as if testing it. "That's what this is." "Yes." His voice was low. "Honest. You can stay. You can leave. But whatever you choose, it's yours. No one owns you now." Grace. Something in his tone, something raw, almost wounded, made her stop. For the first time since she met him, she didn't see a gun, or power, or mystery. She saw a man trying, maybe for the first time in his life, to mean something good. Her fear didn't disappear, not completely. But it shifted. It became something else. Curiosity. Connection. Maybe even trust. And as the sun began to sink behind the mountains, painting the sky in gold and crimson, Grace realized something. She couldn't quite explain. The man who had crashed into her life like a storm might also be the only one who could teach her how to stand in the rain without being afraid of it anymore. The news came like a ripple through a dark pond, small at first, then spreading until it touched everything. Adrian had gone out that morning to take a call. When he returned, his face was closed in that way that made the house feel smaller, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. He didn't say much. He never did when he needed to. He simply placed a paper on the table and let the letters do the talking. Dean. Assault. Sheriff Wallace. The words tasted like iron in Grace's mouth. She read them once. Twice. As if repetition might rearrange the letters into something less real. But the meaning didn't change. Dean and his uncle were looking for Adrian. They were looking to make this personal, to drag their anger into his world, and paint their version of justice across their small town. Panic rose hot and quick inside her. She felt it in her chest. An animal that had learnt to survive on adrenaline and fear. "What if they come after him because of me?" she whispered, though the question barely left her lips. It felt shameful to think that her worst night might rip something dangerous into the life of the man who'd saved her. Adrian heard the fear without being told. He watched her only for a moment, then moved like a single, efficient shadow through the room. His hand covered hers. The touch was light, but it carried a weight that steadied her. "They won't find us," he said, the certainty in his voice like a shield. "And they won't touch you again." It was a promise that came without theatrics. No thunderous vows. No grand gestures. Just a statement. A man taking responsibility for the storms he'd invited into her life. When his men arrived later that day, there was an edge to their presence that she felt even through the thick curtains and the safe rooms. They moved with quiet competence. The kind that made people bend where they were asked, and cross lines that would otherwise have been unthinkable. The implication was unmistakable. Justice in this house had a different flavor. It wasn't the courthouse with its slow kind of law. It was a swift thing. Efficient and certain. It was a comfort and a terror in the same breath. Grace hated that feeling. the simultaneous relief and unease. She had traded one set of dangerous people for another, but Adrian's promise held her days past without the knock she feared. Without the silhouette of Dean in the doorway. He was gone. The town whispered about it. The kind of rumors that curl and change until you can't tell the truth from gossip. Grace stopped reading the headlines. She stopped listening to the old men at the diner speculate about where people disappeared to. She kept her head down and focused on learning to breathe again. The nights, though, were still an unwinding. One evening, after the work had been done and the house had quieted, the two of them found themselves before the fireplace. There were no phones. No men on the perimeter. Not urgent messages. For the first time since the diner, Adrian let the armor fall in private. They sat close, the flames painting their faces with a softness that made the world outside feel distant and brittle. The room smelled faintly of cedar and wine, ordinary things. Domestic things. Elements of a life she had never imagined for herself. Behind the familiarity, though, lay a history she hadn't seen, the choices Adrian hadn't explained. The weights he'd carried. "You saved me," he said. When the words finally came, they arrived almost as an apology. They weren't the words she expected to hear from a man who could orchestrate the movement of people like chess pieces. They were small and human. Vulnerable. Grace's voice came out thin. "I don't need saving." The protest was as much for herself as for him. "I need the truth." She needed to know who she was living with. What she'd stepped into. She needed him to stop being a myth. Adrian looked at the flames as if they contained all the answers he'd been avoiding. "I've done terrible things," he admitted. "More than I deserved to say out loud. I did things that made me believe mercy wasn't for me." His eyes met hers. Steady and heavy. "But the night I saw you, the way you kept going. Even when everything tried to break you, I remembered what mercy felt like. I remembered that people can still be better than their worst acts." He didn't try to wash away his past. He didn't beg for absolution. He simply put it down between them like a fact that needed no defense. There was no pretense. He knew who he was. He knew the damage he could do. But there was also a recognition that he had chosen something different with Grace. A line he would not cross. A vow he would keep. Grace's hands shook. The life she'd known was a string of choices that had always come with a price. The choices of men who loved control more than people. The choices of girls who learned early that survival sometimes meant silence. In Adrian's confession, she heard the possibility of a different kind of choice. Not the exchange of one cage for another, but the opening of a door. "You can walk away," Adrian said softly. Like offering her options could be an act of love. "You can go teach. You can finish school. You can leave this whole thing behind." He swallowed. Hunched just a little. As if the admission cost him. "Or you can stay not as something I own, but as someone who chooses me." Her breath hitched. That was the moment. The story shifted not with a thunderclap, but with the quiet click of a hinge opening. Choice, offered without strings, felt foreign and intoxicating. It suggested that she could be more than someone who endured. "I don't want to be saved," she whispered. "But I don't want to be afraid anymore." The admission was small, but it unlatched something inside her. For the first time in years, she wasn't negotiating for permission to live. He reached for her. And this time, when his mouth found hers, the kiss was nothing like the chaotic, desperate things she had known before. It was gentle, like a promise, like a repair. Their bodies fit together with the ease of people who had seen each other's worst and still chosen to remain. It was not lust that drove them. It was recognition, two damaged people offering the possibility of healing. They slept that night in a way she hadn't allowed herself to, in a long time, with the covers pulled up. The room safe. A human near her, who was not a threat. Morning came with a peace that felt not fragile, but earned. Weeks passed. The hospital visits and the court rumors faded into a background hum. Adrian's world kept its distance from hers in a way that let her reclaim the small parts of life she'd lost. He kept his promise. No one dragged her back into the old horrors. He kept his distance. Never a demand. Never an ownership. That balanced fierce protection with gentle respect felt like a new kind of power. She went back to teaching. It began as a small thing, a substitute shift in the neighboring town. Then a part-time evening class. The first day, she stood at the front of the classroom, heart hammering like it never had before. She realized how much she'd missed, the simple act of being useful. The students were noisy and bright and unbearably human. Their curiosity was a balm. They asked questions about grammar and science, and why the sky was blue. They wanted more out of life. And she remembered what it felt like to want something honest and unadorned. Adrian watched from a distance at first. Patient as always, he never hovered at the back of the room. Never introduced himself to the parents. Never sought applause for what he'd done. He watched her through a window in the afternoon sun. Hands folded. An expression on his face that was just quiet pride. Not possessive. Not claiming. Simply presence. Grace moved through her days with a steadiness that surprised her. She paid bills. Called people back. Bought a plant that she actually remembered to water. Freedom, she found, was built not in the dramatic things, but in the repeated, small gestures that add up to a life. One late afternoon, after class, she walked across the playground to the edge of the field, where the building met the gravel path leading home. Adrian stood there, as if he'd been waiting all along. He smiled in the way that had softened the edges of his face from the moment she'd met him. It wasn't a victory smile. It was the expression of a man who'd chosen to rewrite his own story and had found someone willing to hold the pen with him. "You look happy," he said. Voice low. "It's easy to teach when the kids show up ready to learn," she replied, surprised at the truth in the sentence. "And it's easier to be brave when someone offers you a choice." He reached out and took her hand. It was a small, ordinary gesture that felt monumental. For the first time in a long time, she could imagine a future without the jagged taste of fear. She could imagine a life where her decisions were her own, and where danger, while never completely absent, no longer dictated the shape of her days. They walked to the car in silence, not from a lack of words, but from the kind of understanding that doesn't always need speech. The sun set behind them, bleeding gold over the horizon, and the world looked vast and possible. Grace thought about storms, then how they began with thunder and ended with sunlight. How they rearranged the landscape and left room for something new to grow. She had walked through her storm, through the dark and the fear. She had learned, slowly and stubbornly, to stand in the rain without being swept away. Adrian didn't fix her, and she never expected him to. He offered something rarer, the chance to choose, to own those choices, and to be loved in the space between them. That, she realized as they drove home under a sky, finally clearing of clouds, was enough. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was quieter, truer. It was two people imperfect, stubborn, brave in ways that weren't always loud, deciding to build a life together. One small, courageous day at a time, and that, for now, was everything. And if this story touched something in you, if you felt Grace's fear, her strength, or Adrian's quiet redemption, then don't just leave yet. Leave a comment below and tell us, would you have trusted him? Would you walk into the storm, or run from it? Tap that like button if you felt the emotion. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of love and danger. And share this story with someone who still believes that even in the darkest nights, love can find a way back to the light.